Hello, my name's Jeremy Kemp. Welcome to PsychPod. Today we're talking with Andrea Camperio Ciani. Welcome, Andrea. Introduce yourself.
I'm a professor of psychology. I teach various courses like genes, mind and social behavior, human and animal behavior, and mostly psychological evolutionary psychology. I'm an evolutionary psychologist, and my main interest is sexual behavior. And more than that, I especially focused on the genetics of homosexual behavior.
Talk to me about one of your research studies.
Well, the main research was to try and find a solution to the famous Darwinian paradox about homosexuality, especially about male homosexuality, because many evidence were suggesting that homosexuality was had some sort of genetic influence. But as you can imagine, what kind of genetic influence you can have if the sexual behavior you induce when you're homosexual is a non-reproductive. So how can the genes, the presumed genes that are transmit for homosexuality be transmit between male and male if male-male sexual intercourse don't produce any offspring? So that was a big question and was used by the church to support the fact that homosexuality was not genetic, but was a sin and was a crime. And so you had to recover from homosexuality. So my first study, after studying animal homosexuality and focusing on human homosexuality, I saw that something was not working, that in fact the genetic was highly possible. And so I started to study this problem. And finally, I find a solution. I've been studying around 100 homosexuals compared to 100 heterosexuals. And the first thing I found out is that homosexual male have much more homosexual relatives on the maternal side than on the paternal side. And so that already give you an explanation why there should be so many homosexual just on the maternal side than on the paternal side. And that was puzzling. It couldn't be just that every line on the maternal side decided to become homosexual and on the other side, no. And then I also found out that late-born homosexual, late-born brothers were more frequently homosexual than first-born brothers. And this was already suggested by colleague Ray Blanchard. But this did not explain the genetics. What I found out by exploring the pedigree of these people from the maternal side and the paternal side, I found out that on the maternal side, the females, the sister, the mother, the grandmother, produce almost 1/3 more children than the mother and grandmother of the non-homosexual subject. So what we start suspecting, and we then formalize it in a theory that's called sexually antagonistic selection, is that a specific gene that when is in a male produces more homosexuality, not determines, but induce more homosexuality. But while it's in a female, it produces more offspring. So you can imagine it as a gene that drives you toward male sexuality. So if you are a male, you are attracted to males, but if you're a female, you're attracted to males as well. So the double result is that this gene from females passes to males and promotes homosexuality, and from males doesn't pass to males because those males are homosexual already and don't transmit the gene. So why this gene these gene factors, and not one gene, is more than one, and what we discovered later, is that in a female promotes fecundity, and in the males reduce fecundity. So is in balance, is in an equilibrium. So what we found later, I'm making a long story short, we found that bisexual were the same, exactly like homosexual. They had higher number of bisexual or homosexual relative on the maternal side, and the mother, the aunt, were more fecund. And then we studied females. In females, this thing is different because female get the X chromosome that is inherited in males only from the mother. The female receive it from both the mother and the father. But what we found is also that in lesbian, it's much more difficult to study lesbian than to study male, because sexuality is more smooth, is less clear, less defined. But we found that straight lesbian had much less offspring than as compared heterosexuals. So it's true that homosexual orientation reduce fecundity in homosexual females. And this was discussed because, of course, in the past, if you were a female and you were lesbian, your parents would force you to have kids. So some people say, well, maybe lesbian didn't have a problem of non-reproducing. No, we found an evidence that they reproduce less. But what we found at the entire pedigree, we calculated how many offspring were lost due to the lesbian female and how many offspring were lost to the lesbian relative to the lesbian female. And we calculated 1.5 offspring in the pedigree, in the whole family, less due to the lesbian gene. But what we found, and in the whole pedigree of the lesbian, there was 1.5 more offspring from the heterosexual part of the family. So even the genetic factor of lesbians was perfectly balanced by an increased fecundity in the whole pedigree, not only in the maternal side, but also in the paternal side. So then the next puzzle that we had, we understood very well that the homosexuality is not determined genetically, is influenced genetically. We also calculated how much the influence genetic is between 20 and 35%. So it's a consistent influence, but is not the totality. So saying that homosexuality is genetic is wrong. Is genetically influenced, though, and this is very important to recognize. And then my question was how this gene express themselves. So it's not a whole decision, but what is the influence that genetics provide to an individual to turn out that he's going to become gay rather than heterosexual. And so I tested androphilia. Androphilia is how much you like a male body as compared to a female body. How much a male body excites you more than a female body. We studied this first on males by exploring androphilia. And we found very interesting results because this we studied with a very sophisticated mechanism. It's called implicit association test. So it's a test based on figures, images, and quick responses to the computer that you cannot avoid not responding. It's very difficult to lie on this mechanism. It's called implicit. It's based on how rapidly you associate a body that you see a male body, and how much rapidly you associate it with erotic terms or non-erotic terms. And on the other side, you see a female image, and how frequently and rapidly you associate it with erotic or non-erotic. with this mechanism, we found out all over the world, on the 5 continents, on 1,000 subjects, that constantly in every continent, 18% of males found out more exciting a male body. 18% is a very high frequency because the frequency of acknowledged homosexuality, explicitly acknowledged, is between 5, 6, maybe 10, depending, of course, of the culture, of the restriction, of the homophobia, and so on. So we saw that this 18% is perhaps the basis of the genetic influence. That means there are some individuals that find the genetically attractive, erotic, a male body. That does not mean that it will become homosexual. Maybe it will become an artist, maybe become a poet about describing the body, but not necessarily becoming homosexual. Like, I make an example, maybe it's more stupid, but there are many people that like the body of a child, but not for this reason they are pedophiles, okay? So our hypothesis that needs to be confirmed, but was interesting, the data, that androphilia, the sexual attraction to male body, is the genetic prerequisite. If you have that, you might or might not become homosexual. But if you don't have that, it's very difficult you become homosexual. If you don't like the body, you're not attracted to the body, it's very difficult you will induce in homosexual behavior. And finally, we did the same study in females with genephilia. So that is the attraction to female body by females. And we studied here 500 females all over the 5 continents. We used this, both studies were worldwide, and we found that 75% of females are more attracted to female body than male body. And that was really at odds with the fact that declared homosexual female were around between 10 and 15% in my study. And so we suspected that genephilia was not really representing an erotic base, but was more representing an emulation. Females that would like to look like that beautiful female body. So it's not sexual, but is only to look like. And what we found, in fact, is that 50% of the 75% were, in fact, in this case, they were saying, no, I don't want to have sex with this female, but I find this female to be as beautiful as I would like to be. I would like to be like that. But the other, around 35% of female, were saying, no, I like this body, both because I would like to be like that, but also erotically. And but this female don't describe themselves as homosexual. So the result is, while androphilia is a clear prerequisite for homosexuality in males, genephilia is much more complex, is much more related to a fluid interpretation of female sexuality. And we know that homosexual males, once they become homosexual, it's very, very rare they turn back and become heterosexual again, and vice versa. Instead, in female, this is much more common. Female might spend a whole life heterosexual, and when they become a widow, they decided to have a homosexual relation with another female. Or the other way around, female that by young age are only homosexual, and then when they become older, they decide to have heterosexual behavior. This is much more rare in males. So females and males have similar strategies. The origin of homosexuality is similar. We also found the genetic base for homosexuality in males, but in females, the situation is much more complex. This is more or less my 25-year study on sexual behavior, focusing on homosexual.
Do you want to talk about a big idea from your research?
The big idea is that genetics is extremely important. Is extremely important in explaining even the, how you say, nits and grits of the small expression of behavior, modulating. So now we know through the studies of Professor Plumbing that almost every behavior has a genetic component. But this relating to homosexuality is very important because the main social result I achieved by this is by demonstrating that there is a strong component of genetic influence in homosexual behavior. The Supreme Court of India, that was punishing homosexuality with 10 years jail, and the rule was coming out from the old British law that was punishing homosexuality. And in 2018, due to my studies, the Supreme Court of India depenalized homosexuality, giving social rights, freedom, and the right of expression to around between 60 and 100 million people, homosexual in India. And following the Supreme Court of India, following also all the other ex-colonies with the British law, adopted the depenalization of homosexuality. So this shows what was the criteria. The Supreme Court adopted the idea that if a behavior has a genetic influence, you cannot discriminate people based on that genetic influence. It would be racism. And I believe that this is an extremely important thing. And on the other hand, I've been criticized sometimes saying, oh, you are suggesting a genetic influence on behavior. I want to be self determined. But I'm not saying that homosexuals are inevitably genetically determined. I'm just saying that androphilia behavior is genetically influenced, and based on that, you make your own decision. And in certain countries where homosexuality is strictly prohibited, like in Iran, you decide not to become homosexual. And it's open to you, it's open to your freedom of choice based on your instincts and your genetic drives.
Tell me now about a psychologist who was inspirational for you, who was a source of inspiration.
Well, no doubt is Robert Rivers. Robert Rivers is one of the major behavioral ecologists, and I would say the father of evolutionary psychology. And his bright sight, he formalized sexual relations. He formalized parent-offspring competition. He formalized reciprocal altruism, and he explained how the genetics influence social behavior. He's the major genius. Unfortunately, his wild spirit is bipolar, and like me, and so he got in a lot of troubles. He had a lot of difficulties in working into university. He had 13 children and in counted number of wives and partners, but his bright ideas were fundamental for any sort of next social behavior, social biology, evolutionary psychology, and behavioral ecology. He was a genius. He wrote 5 or 6 papers, and each of them are fundamental. Robert Rivers is a many time unconsidered genius, but he's the father of most of sociobiology. Yes, I would say Robert Rivers is, and I had the luck of meet him in Santa Cruz and then meet him in Zurich, and I also applied for a scholarship with him, but then my university in Milan didn't allow me. But I always kept a good relationship with him.
Well, Andrea, thank you so much for taking part in this short interview. It's been fascinating. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's a pleasure.